Commissioners, good morning. It's nice to be in front of you without an emergency, and at least for now. And we have an awful lot to share with you, and I'm in that dubious position of where we started out with only 110 slides, and we have boiled that down to 20, and I have just a few minutes before lunch. So let's see what I can do here and brief you. I just have to share with you that in my 30 years of experience in emergency management, you gave us a very tall challenge with our March Irma After Action, and I want to tell you that I appreciate it. It's good stuff. It's been an awful lot of work while we run the county, we recover, we work through FEMA, and I am totally honored by your commitment to help continue to build preparedness and help build a disaster resilient community. And so I will tell you that the entire team has been working quite hard. And as I've said, response is hard, recovery is harder, and we're plugging away. Let me talk about the first initiative that you mentioned, and one of the priorities that you had in our after action was to review commercial fueling. And we know what a challenge, we remember the challenges that we had. We also know that we had a very unique storm situation. We don't want to discount that, of having both ports of Everglades and Tampa both being impacted or potentially impacted by this storm. What we have done at this point, and a special thanks to Dan Rodriguez and his team at Hazardous Waste Division, they've mapped all the fuel stations, gone through an inspection process to evaluate resiliency. We're looking at point of sale, and one thing I need to just remind you in today's world is that it is one thing to have power at the gas pumps in order to pump fuel. It's another issue to have connectivity. We all have point of sale, we have internet control devices on pumps, and sometimes those are separate chains of communication that can fail during the disaster. And does anybody even use cash anymore today? So as part of the transaction. So while we look at generator reliability and some mandates that we'll be discussing with you in the future, understand that that may not be the fix to everything because of internet connectivity, point of sale control. The team has inspected about 90% of the fuel stations, and what we want to do is make sure that with these fuel stations, as you'll see in further slides, what is available, we'll put that information out on the web. They have kindly, and I know this is a little bit of an eye chart, certainly in Big County, but this is what they have mapped so far. 9 retail stations in Collier County have generators. 34 have the generator transfer switch. And again, that's kind of a hole in state legislation in terms of the transfer switch and having the generator on site, whether or not the retailer executes the installation, that temporary installation of the generator. We have no one, to our knowledge, pending a generator or a generator transfer switch in 61 stations without any provisions. Now, the Florida statutes, which really came into place on about after Charlie or Wilma, provided the state put in a legislative direction, but there's no enforcement arm to that legislative direction, which means that a certain number of pumps, regardless of the number of pumps, but a station or a station going through substantial renovation has to, and within the proximity of an evacuation corridor, has to have the generator transfer switch or the generator. What also is some discussing in there about periodic testing, but again, local doesn't have the necessary enforcement. They can provide us a letter, they can provide discussion. In this case, the Solid Waste Division has been helping the emergency management program, and it does provide that if a generator transfer switch is not installed or in a new or substantially renovated station, the county can withhold the CO. Now, let me provide, yes?
Because I might have misunderstood him. When you said it provides that they have to have a generator switch and a generator, is that what you said?
It's an or. And it's that or that is exactly problematic as to what we're going to bring forth with some LDC discussions with you. It's a good point. It is an or.
Most choose to have a switch, not a generator.
Most choose to have a switch. That's correct. So one of the things that we wanted to do, because we are working with the staff at GMD to expand that legislative authority, which we can do. There's no preemption concerns here in the LDC, and we have met with DSAC. We were scheduled to be with the Collier County Planning Commission last week, and we got postponed due to a very crowded agenda that they had. So the timeline below there means that we plan on circling back with you with LDC amendments on June the 26th. What we want to add in the LDC are those areas that were completely void, essentially a void in the legislation, and that is we want to talk about point of sale. We want to talk about flexibility to incentivize gas stations to put generators, especially where there's site constraints, okay? So there's going to have to be a little flexibility in the site plan or existing site plans to get these generators installed and ensure a third-party testing. And again, this third-party testing is really what we think is or a third-party attestation to the reliability was also really the cumulative effect of what happened in the nursing homes and rest homes where there was not a thorough inspection and a thorough testing process. So let me move forward through that, and some of this will come to bear. Fuel strategies internal to Collier County. So we were going to address a component with the LDC. Now we're going to talk about internal operations. Work to date there is listed with the towable fuel transfer tanks, and I believe that may be a 300 to a 500 gallon limit. That's all by law you're allowed to tow. The sheriff has purchased a couple of 4 towable units. Fleet has been budgeted for an additional fuel tender, and that's kind of a representative sample as to what that vehicle may look like. And we're looking at the pony tank installation, which, if you're familiar, that is the mounted tank in the back of a pickup truck that can provide certain provisions for fuel. And again, that is something that does take some care and some training with the installation. Working with our purchasing department, bringing a consortium for a larger fuel contract base, using multiple parties and using most likely multiple vendors in a fuel cooperative. Mr. Coyman is managing that for us. We are going back out for an RFP for disaster refueling tankers. Now, that's a very unusual market. We don't see many folks in South Florida offering that service. So that is a fuel tender, which is kind of what's illustrated in the picture here, that is a contract organization separate and apart from our bulk fuel. Now, one of the reasons that this is just now coming out is that we finally got an opinion from FEMA that FEMA would not let us use GSA contracts for these type of services. They'll let the state use it, but they won't let the counties use it. So that means that we're going to have to work through a new bidding process in order to secure that. It has been historically an option that counties could use GSA contracting for these type of services. It's promoted by GSA and FEMA, but a new rule change has said that we can no longer use those GSA contracts for this service.
Could you please explain GSA?
I'm sorry. General Services Administration under the U.S. government has a large list of contracts and even a website that you can use their contracts for disaster support. But under the new, some of the new FEMA financing and reform acts, they're now no longer letting local governments use this particular contract. And my presumption is that they think that we can lower that price. When GSA does a contract, it is for the entire continental U.S. So it's not broken down by region. So the thought process is that probably at the local level, they would prefer we go through a different procurement strategy. Essentially, FEMA doesn't want us to piggyback many contracts. Hence our own FEMA, hence our own debris removal contracts, et cetera.
Lack of competition?
No, I think it's just part of their continued push to reduce the cost of disaster at the local level.
So we have to go out and bid, and
We-
we have to get and so the idea is that we'll do better if we go out to bid in
That's correct.
advance of.
That's correct. Yes, ma'am. But it was something that we had hoped that we could use because it would save us that particular procurement and would open up in multiple vendors. But we're going to have to go back out for our own outside procurement efforts. We are looking also at large volume rental storage tanks. We have found a rental vendor that has those. They are starting to demobilize a little bit of those tanks. Most all of these that were in storage have been in Puerto Rico for the last, ever since Maria, but there is some of that large volume storage tank starting to come back to continental U.S., and we found a rental firm that can help us with that. And we've also been evaluating military-type fuel bladder storage, where we would have a lay-down pad and we could store fuel in a multi-thousand-gallon fuel bladder, something that the military uses.
And where would we store that bladder?
We would have to store it, but it does collapse. It collapses to about the size of a pickup truck bed. So it is manageable in terms of storage, and then you unfold it basically like a large portable swimming pool with an enclosure.
At the beginning of an event?
Yes,
And to anticipate the event or to anticipate the hurricane season?
to anticipate the event. And again, we're going to review on the rental equipment as well. Now, the bladder is a purchase. They're not a rental. We're still evaluating that and looking at the cost benefit of that as well as the storage. The rental tanks, not a problem. When we start, we'll make a conscious decision based on our time delineated schedule to acquire those rental tanks if needed.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Let's talk about the nursing homes and rest homes. This has been a phenomenal challenge, certainly something that's been very unique. We're glad that the governor signed that legislation on March 26th, but if you'll notice, he put some April 30 deadlines to submission to local government as well as AHCA, the Agency for Healthcare Administration. AHCA is still writing rule on a lot of this activity right now, concurrent with the deadlines that assisted living facilities and nursing homes have. I am very proud of our team. Lauren Bonnick, our Human Services Program Manager, put an emergency power plan template together. We think we're the first county that provided such a format, and we had a webinar and a workshop with most of the nursing homes and rest homes present, gave them this template in order to help meet this requirement, allow us to quickly evaluate their emergency power plans, and make sure that they are moving forward with all of these emergency power plans and air conditioning plans that they have to have. The majority of these agencies are complying. They are struggling in the marketplace between generators, contractors, maintenance people, all of these things that they need to be doing that the statute requires. They're all working very hard, but the market demand right now on generators is quite challenging. A lot of facilities that we've spoken to are renting equipment for the entire season while they wait on construction plans and renovation plans to come forward for their emergency cooling as well as their emergency power. Part of that, again, in the state legislation has some holes in it, and we're going to bring this also for discussion to the Land Development Code. This will be part of a discussion we plan on having with you on June 26th. One of the things that was, again, missing out of the legislative effort was a third-party attestation to the reliability of that generator, meaning has it been maintained, has the fuel been properly conditioned, has it been tested under a load. So many of these facilities are running the generator, running the engine part, but not transferring power. Hence, they're not putting a load on the particular, on the engine itself, and then the failure occurs. So we're going to bring that to you with some discussions within the LDC and had good comments, good favorable response in DSAC on that particular component as well. External power. Our public utilities folks have just worked incredibly hard to address what the challenges were with lift station facilities, commercial power. We've met extensively with Florida Power and Light, and we're just one of hundreds that are looking for more and better out of FP&L. I know that they're working very hard on wind mitigation. If you'll notice on major corridors where they're replacing wooden poles with concrete poles, these are poles that should be in the 140-mile-an-hour wind load or greater. So they are working on hardening their network, at least their primary transmission lines. And I believe their goal is 2024 is to have all major power lines, all of their primary and arterials managed at that wind load speed. So that's good. After that, secondary lines, whether above ground or below ground, will certainly, I'm sure, be a future phase in their hardening. Rental contracts, again, we know that we have to have a large number of rentals. We're going to work to refine that rental contract period where we can provide more specificity on the equipment, more specificity on the connectivity, and more as well as the delivery. Lift stations, quite an accomplishment here, but as you know, we have pump stations everywhere, and correct me if I'm wrong, Dan, probably public and private in excess of 700, close to 800 lift stations around Collier County. Just to give you a little historical perspective here, with 2007, Public Utilities Division started out with 22 portables and 21 master pump stations on generators. In 2017, which is the last 10 years, they've added 20 additional diesel generators, 16 portables, 3 diesel pumps added to master pump stations, and 12 generators installed under the utility standards by the private developers. So we've increased at this point to 95 locations. And here's what I think is a phenomenal amount of work ahead here, and that is working with FEMA under mitigation grant opportunities that might provide us as much as a 75% cost share against a 25% local cost share, a goal to bring 54 diesel generators in our pump combinations over the next 2.5 to 3 years, pending that FEMA timeline. Additional, that's correct. So bringing us up to 162. And there's master pump stations there with the December 2018 and 2019 goals for some of the master pump stations to get additional equipment, and then 5 more portables scheduled for the summer of 18 procurement. The public and private activity is one of the development standards. The Utility Standards Manual is certainly been under review, and what we want to do within that, especially for these private developers and the potential for the conveyance of these utilities to Collier County, is to put more greater resiliency in that construction. GMD will continue to inspect all lift stations in the unincorporated area. That inspection is expected to be done by September of 2018. They want to benchmark what we have with the inventory and the disaster resilience of the private lift stations as well, and again look at ordinances to impose a maintenance shift on these private lift stations in terms of say a maintenance shift. But what we're trying to do is find opportunities to make those more resilient, whether it's power on site, whether it's power connections, could be elevated pump motors as an example, anything that will make them more resilient along that process and as part of that construction, whether it's repair, renovation, or new construction. Community resiliency as a whole, and the buzzword that our emergency management industry is called the whole community approach. We're working very hard to address areas of sheltering, the power, the logistics. Part of an additional LDC discussion coming to you will be what can we use at the community level, such as clubhouses, as an alternative for refuge, where a community can, maybe they won't need to shelter at that particular community center. But one thing that's very important is that they may need power, they may need restrooms, they may need internet connectivity, they may need air conditioning. So we're discussing and going to bring some options to you to discuss as an impact to the LDC. We're looking at county facilities across the board and trying to find some opportunities for hardening. That hardening could be anything from storm shutters, could be to window replacement, could be to generator connectivity. And again, looking in two concepts for funding. Obviously some local funding, local match might be necessary, but looking at FEMA and their mitigation program, and there may be some opportunities where Collier County will fit into the community block development grants, the CDBG grants that are just for disaster. Now that is a large amount of money, but the rules on that funding and what the allocations have not yet been made. The Governor's Office of Economic Development will be the lead management agency for that CDBG grant money, and we're looking at some of the draft rulemaking for that grant opportunity. We're going to continue to map future facilities that can support some strategic options and locations for the county. An example is that we just met with Dr. Jones at Florida Southwest last week to talk about some options of how we can utilize his campus. And I can't say enough about Dr. Patton and the school district and her commitment to participate with us not only in the public sheltering but other buildings that we might need for ancillary support. So we're working very hard with her. As you all know, the legislature was really paying attention to Irma, and then we had the tragedy in Parkland. And certainly a lot of our momentum, rightfully so, was kind of lost with Irma as we were addressing school safety. Dr. Patton's team certainly has some requirements and activities under the new legislation that they're taking a look at. So I know they're catching their breath from that, and they'll certainly circle back with us as we continue to work on shelter issues. We have really kind of narrowed down how we want to address the employee engagement in disaster, and we had great attitudes, great support, great people doing great things during the disaster from the county staff. We're going to put that in a little different framework. We have a new policy that has been issued, and we'll categorize our staff available for certain missions, provide them some expedited training through our Collier University, and do some hands-on lab work with them for things like generators and supply deployment, supporting our logistics and pods operations. So I think we've got a very, very good framework for how we want to implement the use of county employees in response and recovery. As I mentioned, Dr. Patton has been working with us quite cooperatively. The county manager and deputy county manager and I enjoyed an excellent briefing from Dr. Patton on this subject a few weeks ago, kind of restating her commitment to support our shelter operations. She's continuing to work on her power generation. As you know, we had some challenges with the generator at Palmetto Ridge. She's working to work on some load tests to make sure that there's a renewed effort in the preventive maintenance with her equipment. And she has partnered with us. Every shelter training guide has her logo and our logo on it, and we've worked side by side to build training materials and video materials for all of her staff. And I think that's a phenomenal commitment to have her employees, her principals, teachers, and staff engaged to help us with probably, and as we're planning for 26 shelter buildings for the current season. I hope we don't have to use 26, but we're going to plan for 26. We're using rental resources. We're looking at rental equipment companies to come in and help us provide redundant power at some of these key shelter locations. As you know, Palmetto Ridge is our special needs shelter, and we want to continue to have a backup to the backup at Palmetto Ridge, and we'll do that through rental. Middle schools will most likely become our pet-friendly shelter. Dr. Patton has spent time working with staff to do a little bit of pet-friendly shelter training that's been involved there, and she has certainly opened the door, and we had a very successful pet-friendly shelter operation there. And we'll be working with the sheriff and the fire districts to deconflict some of these buildings that we need for ancillary support, whether it's for deputies, whether it's for county employees, families, whether it's for fire districts that want to move a command post from their station further inland. So we're going to re-roster, if you will, ancillary support buildings. Communications and customer relations, as you know, we had millions of social media hits and 35,000, I think, phone calls to the Hurricane Hotline Center that Ms. Price operates. We are going to work hard to put some structure in that communication process so that we get more information that can be in digestible bites so that the county manager can get that out and make sure that press releases and briefings are relayed to you. The communication plan with Everbridge, we now have on board our alert and warning coordinator who will be bringing the Everbridge system, which is an automated alert and notification system. That'll be a discussion for you all in the future, but will allow residents to opt in so that they can get emergency messages as well. So we'll be bringing all of those activities to you. We're about 85% done with the Everbridge setup, so we'll be on schedule to have that ready for the hurricane season. Public information initiatives, we want to continue to make sure that we use as much signage as possible. We always have a risk. It's about getting those signs out pre-landfall, and will they be safe? Will those signs, can we protect those signs during landfall, and can we redeploy and get them out as needed post-landfall event? If you remember, a lot of discussion about folks not really recognizing that it was the county employees that were out there making deliveries, and we're going to work to bring a county logo and a safety vest to county employees, so not only for their safety in working in the roadway, which is a DOT requirement, but also make sure that if a citizen sees someone in a blue vest, they know they can ask for some help and some guidance. The Joint Information Center concept, we want to continue to invite the sheriff and the municipalities to join us in that joint information, which is that one location for media information to be processed and disseminated, making sure that we're putting out rumors and conveying on behalf of the municipalities, the county, and the sheriff, the pertinent agencies, all the pertinent information. So working that joint information concept. Yes, ma'am.
How did it work with our cities in this issue? I mean, certainly Everglades City had enough to deal with, but I'm thinking the city of Naples, because they had their own EOC, and right, there was a distinct lack of information about exactly what was going on in the county.
Well, I think a couple of things that we're doing. We're going to, a couple of approaches here. Number one, we certainly want to, again, express our invitation to have the city have a media representative or a public information officer there. The fire department was the primary liaison in the EOC, but they were obviously got overwhelmed by response and operations and logistics. So we want to make sure that we, again, offer that invitation to the city, making sure that there's seating for that city representative as well. And the city is joining us, as you know, in our collaboration software in the EOC. So I think we'll have a better, not only a mechanical process, a personnel process, a technological process. So we welcome that, and we will make sure that we're pumping information to them and vice versa, that they're sharing information with us.
Okay, thank you.
And we're open to any further suggestions with the city or any process that they'd like to revisit. We're happy to have that discussion with them.
They offered, ask you to come to present to them of what could be rather than what was?
No, ma'am, but we continue to have, we have monthly training in the EOC where we invite internal and external agencies. So we've not had that specific invite, but we're very happy to accommodate that discussion. And the deputy county manager and I presented on the hurricane, and I believe you were there when we did a leadership Collier event as well. So we hit the highlights of some of that, but we're certainly happy to re-energize that dialogue.
Thank you.
Just a few more logistics. Again, I think we did a very good job, but we worked awfully hard, and I'd like for us to work a little bit smarter next time. As you know, we offloaded about 63 tractor-trailer loads of commodities. In my perspective, it was the best commodity delivery operation I've ever had with the state of Florida. The goods and commodities we requested were on time. Again, we're going back and looking at some of these FEMA contracts that our GSA contracts, General Services Administration contract, that we may not be able to use, and we might need to go in and contract and have a contractor available that actually does some of this logistical support. Might take a little bit of load off of the county employees. We are interviewing our volunteer and donations coordinator. We had to post that 3 times. But we now have a very excellent group of candidates. We're 75% through with that interview process. I'm very anxious to bring that individual on board. There's a lot going on in long-term recovery right now. Broward County United Way just won the long-term disaster case management contract, a multi-million-dollar contract from FEMA. They're just getting started, getting that organization set up. This individual worked very closely with the long-term case management efforts of FEMA and the state to continue to support our residents. We're anxious to find an opportunity and a funding resource to enclose the East Bay of the EOC. That logistically worked out really well. But until we can get some air conditioning and get some waterproofing done in there, we run the risk of being at the mercy of Mother Nature as we store and distribute commodities there. We are hopeful that the state does not do away with their logistical warehouse operation in Orlando. That's come under some scrutiny, and we hope that FEMA and the state will continue to build that first push of logistics for the state in Orlando. All 63 of our tractor-trailer loads came from Orlando and right out of the state's inventory. So that worked extremely well, and we want that service to continue. Just a few more quickly. We're working really hard on this critical care for these special needs clients, these that are functionally challenged. We're going to have to go through some process and triage who is best suited for the special needs shelter, who can we get some space at in critical locations, maybe other hospitals or nursing homes. But without a doubt, our aging population who have some very critical needs, such as electrically dependent, those numbers are only continuing to increase. So we're talking to the Department of Health, who has the statutory responsibility for that care, but emergency management is to support them logistically. We're looking at all types of opportunities to find ways to beef up capacity. We're also talking with the state because, frankly, some of those support teams that should have come to Palmetto Ridge were late, and we needed them much earlier. We needed a larger manpower force. Same kind of situation. We were competing with 47 counties for mutual assistance, and a lot of that mutual assistance was tied up in Harvey as well. But we are working to better support that special needs effort. I could spend an entire day on that. Finally, mutual aid for other things, and I kind of refer this as to the folks with shovels and dump trucks, but we have always been a participant in the statewide mutual aid agreement. Resources, as I mentioned, from 47 counties drawing on a national mutual aid network after Harvey made these resources scarce. Our traffic ops folks are looking at mutual aid partnerships with similar sized communities on the East Coast. And one of the things I need to make sure that you understand with this mutual aid is that, number one, it is in some cases, depending on the arrangement, it can be at no charge. I help you, you help me. But that's okay after a couple of days. Much beyond a few days, maybe a week or so, obviously these agencies incur cost. We would incur costs supporting someone. They would incur costs supporting us. But the other challenge in this mutual aid is housing. So one of the things you have to be careful, you ask for these folks to come in and work 12, 14, 16-hour days to help your community rebuild, but there is a component there for housing, food, fuel, and that has to be taken into account. And again, if you start bringing in large numbers of mutual aid, you've got to have a completely separate overhead organization to support them. So there's always a balancing act in what you request from mutual aid and how can you care for those people if they're here working for you for a very long period of time. The Florida WARN, which is a wastewater agency response network, is a separate mutual aid agreement engagement, and the chart there kind of gives you a little bit of understanding of bridging the gap in mutual aid. And finally, Collier County does participate in the Emergency Management Assistance Compact. And again, that is essentially allowing us a contractual or a purchase order type arrangement with other municipalities or other response agencies to come in and help us. We'll do some more training on that Emergency Management Assistance Compact business process. Frankly, Florida should have engaged as a state in the EMAC process a little bit stronger. The counties are not necessarily dependent upon the state to engage the compact, but we certainly like working through the state in that endeavor, and we'll make sure that our team understands that mutual aid process. Ms. Price would like to give you a little update on reimbursement, and this is the last slide, and we will both be here for your questions. Lynn?
Good afternoon, Len Price for the record, Administrative Services Administrator. This process has been arduous, to say the least. However, I think we've finally turned a point where we've got $12 million in requests to the state right now that they're working on processing. I can't promise you a date we're going to see those back, but I'm hoping that that's going to help us set a standard for the rest. We're about to put in another request for about $50 million that will cover the big expenses that we had, which was primarily debris removal. At the same time, we've got FEMA folks on the ground working with our team to inspect everything that's been damaged. There's about 150 different places where damage occurred, to go through and do that. And then as they do that, then we can start the procurement process and then ultimately the reimbursement process for that. So we're looking at about $73 million in expenditures for debris, including the waterway debris, and for a total of about $139 million, of which approximately 75 to 80% is what we expect to see back from FEMA and through the state. So like I say, we're finally hit a turning point where I think we're going to start to see a little more action, and myself and our deputy county manager have really been pounding on them hard to get them to shake that money tree loose.
Thank you. Nothing to this point, right?
No.
No money to this point, correct?
Correct.
Any questions for staff?
Yeah, I have a couple little questions. What does a switch do if you don't have a generator?
It's a great comment.
Not enough.
Not enough. Well said. You're exactly right. What the generator transfer switch allows is the isolation of power from the portable generator to the commercial power. So it makes sure that when you plug in a generator, you're not sending that power down the street. You're only distributing that power to the building. And those are that's a very critical safety component. If someone goes in and bypasses one of these switches or tries to do their own home improvement, unlicensed, unregistered electrician work, amateur work, there is a serious risk that they can send power in the reverse direction, downrange, energize a power line, energize a transformer, and then if a responder or someone else thinks that that power line is dead and that transfer switch is not appropriately configured, there could very quickly be injury or death away from this property as a result of the generator, what we call backfeeding, going in reverse is a potential.
And one more question. Are we going to, are we working with the mobile home parks to make sure that they have a hardened facility, whether it's their clubhouse or whatever, so that people right there can go to a place of safety?
I would say yes, and if Jamie is still here, I'd like for him to talk a little bit about the code issue with you. But one of the better news items, and particularly with the newer mobile homes that are being replaced, is that they meet a wind threshold requirement. And then we have always had in our LDC a safe place as an option. But one of the things that we always do in our evacuation notice early on is make sure that mobile home residents realize that there is a level of vulnerability, particularly in an older mobile home, where they need to seek shelter or evacuate earlier. Jamie?
And while we're,
That's a quick question, because that was my number one question as well about the trailer park. But it relates to the whole adding generators to the lift stations and things, because I know Commissioner Taylor and I visited at least one or two, and that was a major issue. But I'm wondering if you've given any thought to how some of these trailer parks, I mean, they don't seem to have the funds to maybe provide a generator. I mean, we given some thought on how we're going to help that process along, because, you know, the ones that, at least that we went to, you know, they didn't have money to do anything. And I don't know, I'm not suggesting that the county pay for anything, but I think it's going to be a challenge to somehow really make it happen as far as upgrades to some of these trailer parks.
It is a challenge, and I want to defer to the experts. But one other comment I would say, and this is one of the things that we've tried to promote, and some folks are certainly reluctant, but one of the options for a lot of these smaller mobile home parks would have been to utilize an SBA loan to try to at least get some of that construction or configuration done as an option. But yes, you're right, there are some limitations. Jamie?
Did you
yeah, I just wanted to make a comment with regard to the manufactured homes. And it's important, regardless of the wind load that Dan spoke about, when an evacuation order is issued, go. That's an important portion of this process. Our systems are set up to be to have people go to shelters and or evacuate from the area and get out of harm's way. A lot of folks don't in fact do that, which then in turn exacerbate our systems, the lift stations that we had. A lot of people sheltered in home during this process, in their own home during this process, still had water, still were flushing their toilets and showering and the like, and then that caused us a lot of consternation as we're going through. So it's just important that when the emergency services, that's important for us to impress upon folks, when emergency services issues the evacuation order, that needs to go.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Jamie French for the record. Just to touch a little bit on the manufactured homes, or as you would know them as mobile homes, the Florida Building Code still refers to them as a manufactured home that is regulated by the Department of Transportation. What it does do, though, because of our wind loads, it does require that they all be a Class 3 in most of the county. Class 3 has got a rating of somewhere between 135 and 145 miles an hour. We would then regulate through the permit process how they're strapped down, how they're connected to the ground, either by pier or by a foundation of sorts, so that we make sure the proper elevation is maintained. And what we saw just through the initial damage assessment, both drive-by as well as visually going by and visiting the homes, those that weren't impacted by flooding, that seemed to be the biggest cause of many of the homes, the newer homes, that they weren't properly elevated or they weren't to the latest elevation required, is that those that were a Class 3 did not suffer any damage. Maybe some outside awning, things like that. But even the way they attach the carports today is much different than what they may have done 20 or 30 years ago.
We've got a lot of old ones here.
Sure do.
We don't have too many. I don't even know of a new mobile home park that has been built. But
So as many of those are coming back in, some of the considerations that we are looking at through our LDC amendments is if that community is considering a clubhouse, we would not consider it if it meets a threshold of, let's say, 3,000 or 5,000 square feet. We're considering that as a place of refuge, not potentially for where they would go and shelter, but a place that would allow them to have a point of distribution for water, commodities, things of that nature that they could partner with the county. So as Dan said, the team and I have worked very close with the development industry. It was a very lengthy meeting last week at DSAC, and they were very involved, supportive, but again, very involved with our approach and how we're thinking. This is a much different way that we've done business in the past, and we're thrilled with the opportunity, and we think that we're going to be able to bring back some very good results for your consideration.
Any other questions? I had a couple of things I was going to throw out there, and I know our court reporters probably, I think we can finish up the agenda, but understanding we're hitting the hour-and-a-half mark. I drive by the FP&L covered parking solar power things at the zoo or North Collier, and I know we have an agreement with. Is there any potential for using those as charging stations, people for phones, whatever it is, during the storm? Or after the storm, rather?
Well, we're looking at lots of creative options. One of the things that we want to do at our shelters with the limited power distribution that we have is, and that was quite an issue in terms of folks wanting to make sure that their cell phones remain charged in all available outlets. So one of the things that we're doing in our shelter kits is reevaluating the additional capability to charge phones. We're also telling people the next thing that you also need to bring with you is your battery pack, your supplemental battery pack, because I think we all lived on our phones during the storm. So we are looking to address that. We have not found, we see charging stations at airports and things like that. We've not found anything yet that fits our disaster budget, but we are looking at things like additional extension cords and wiring strips to make available for phone charging.
And we will talk to FPL about whether we can pull some power off of those grids.
Maybe it's there, it's going to be producing energy after the storm.
We expect to see, and we've seen some discussion, that the newest post-disaster cottage industry will be drive-by charging sites. And so we know that AT&T has some that they have actually taken to concerts and big venues and those type of things. But again, this was just like that same scenario of wanting mobile cellular towers on wheels. They were all locked down for Harvey. And we just had a hard time breaking a lot of those resources loose. And but we know that we're going to see more in the private sector in terms of some charging stations, goodwill type opportunities as well.
I have one more point I'd just like to make, and it's something that I think we need to say out loud. As important as it is for our community when the emergency services issues an evacuation notice, it's also as relevant and is as important to be prepared in advance. The lessons that were learned from this storm are requisite for the preparedness that's necessary. Go today and do your shopping. Have your supply in advance of when the storm in fact shows up. We watched with Irma as she was coming up through the slot. Everybody thought it was going to hit the East Coast, and we were all praying for their safety, and look what it did. Mm-hmm. And when I lost cell service and power on the day of the storm, it was going up the West Coast, and I was praying for the people that were going to get whacked in St. Pete and Tampa, and it went within half a mile of my home when the eye went by. So preparedness in advance is as much as anything. Don't rely, Miss Commissioner Taylor, you spoke about the folks in Everglades City, and about a month after the storm, there was a lady there who was 14 when Donna came through, and Everglades City was in fact the county seat. And I had the pleasure of asking her what kind of assistance she got in 1960 when Donna came through. And there was none, other than a little Salvation Army, Red Cross folks coming along. It's not Salvation Army, forgive me, the Red Cross folks coming through. They were on their own. And what a blessing that we have today to have federal, state, and local support to offer with the recovery process to be as quick as in fact it is. But it is incumbent upon all of us, ourselves, to take care of ourselves until the support that is available can get to us.
You know, it's interesting you say, because I write a column here and there, and at the beginning of June every year, I say time to prepare for your hurricane, and I have a plan that I always do, and right in the beginning, my daughters have said to me, "Oh, we don't need to do this, you know, you're getting too anxious," but I do it anyway, and it's really simple. But you know, all you need to do, you get plenty of water, you make sure you have fresh batteries, you know where your radio is going to be, just the regular things that you have to do. I always fill, if I'm going to go out of town or anything, I fill my tank in the car with gasoline in case somebody else is staying at my house. I have a 5-gallon and two 2-gallon tanks that I fill with gasoline also. And
Where do you
and
keep
we
those
charge
at?
up my generator.
Where
Huh?
you keep your gas cans at?
And we charge the generator. Every couple months, my sons come over and fix it up. You know, it doesn't take any time, but then you're prepared.
Right.
Somebody yelled at me because they said, some guy wrote to me and said, "You're trying to scare the community." No, just prepare. You can always use it afterwards.
That was pre-Irma. I bet he wouldn't say it now.
No, I don't think so.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you
Thanks
all,
for
and thanks to the
indulging me.
county staff for their hard work.
Job well done.
Thank you.